You're listening to the Valley Current.
Hi.
Hey, Rafael.
How are you?
I'm good. I always love that picture behind you. It's just so fabulous.
Have I sent you my wife's art books?
I don't think so. Maybe not. I know she's got a number of them, doesn't she?
Yes, she does.
Wow, it's
And
beautiful.
websites. Yeah, that is beautiful.
It's beautiful. So
And you
how's
have the
life-
Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah, how's life in Southern California?
Well, actually, in our little corner of Topanga, it's gorgeous. The weather is fine. It's really nice here. But we're always afraid of fires.
Fires and mudslides, right?
Not in our part of the world. We're at the top of the hill.
That's nice, because what I remember most about Topanga Canyon is there was a restaurant there that was kind of a Buddhist. I don't know if it still exists, but they all prayed as a group before the evening started. So if you got there early enough, you could watch all the staff. Are they still in business?
The Inn of the Seventh Ray.
Yeah, it's just an amazing place. And of course, I was in
Still
law
there.
school. I mean, I'll tell you,
Yeah.
it was just a magical experience. I was in law school and someone said, oh, there's this great restaurant. It's very, very spiritual. You really can make a night out of it. And of course, I was just a law student at UCLA. I remember going there and just being just floored by the spiritual nature. I'm sure the prices are through the roof. They were pretty high back in the 1970s, but they're still in business. So that's like 50 years, right?
They almost went out for a while. They almost failed. For a while, I called them the Inn of the Seventh Chapter, but they came back and they're doing okay.
It's a Buddhist place, right? Isn't it?
Well, there's some Buddhist overtones there, but I've been there a couple of times lately, and I haven't seen the prayer service. I'm not sure.
So you're a walking distance away, I would guess, right?
If I needed to walk, I could, but of course I'd drive or take my helicopter.
Yeah, I mean, Topanga Canyon's not that big.
No, it's not that big, but it's up and down.
It's up and down, and it's kind of I always thought of it as like a ritzy part of I don't know what to call it. It's not Ventura County yet, right?
No, it's not Ventura County. It's still County of LA.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's ever been ritzy. It's kind of a hippie. Nudist camps, a couple of them around here, things like that.
That's right, hippie.
Yeah.
I have to make my way back there because I have to tell you, I have such a fond memory of that dinner. And the only thing I associate with it, and you're going to say this is unbelievable, is I taught some classes at a business school in Moscow, Russia, 5-6 years ago. And there's this gorgeous restaurant at the top of a high-rise building called the White Rabbit. And it's very, very she and very hard to get a reservation. But one of the business school professors was like, I'm going to get you in, don't worry, just go there. And of course, like they've got bulletproof glass and they've got like metal detectors because all the wealthy oligarchs go there. And it reminded me of the Inn of the Seventh Ray because it was very spiritual. And they started with, and I don't think the inn does it, but maybe they do, you'll tell me. They started with you smelled something, like they wanted to amplify your taste buds. So the White Rabbit in Moscow, and anyone searching can find it, they actually gave you something to smell to open up your taste buds. And then there were like 14 more behind it. Now there's no food. It's just an aroma. And then they...
Wow.
Little tiny servings, like tongue of ox or tongue of this or tongue of some animal. Little tiny servings, all designed to amplify your taste buds. And as I was sitting there, big view of Moscow from the 57th floor or whatever at the top of that building. I'm thinking to myself, God, 50 plus years ago, I was in law school. And something like this happened, but it was in Topanga Canyon. And I couldn't remember the name
Okay.
until you told me. And it was Seventh Ray. So there you go. You brought it all back for me. That was great.
I think that's the one you mean. Yeah.
So,
By the way, what do you think about Brittney Griner being kept in jail? And
I have to tell you, you just scored on exactly the way I think of this topic, which is, who would you rather be? Brittney Griner facing a 10+ year sentence in Russia, probably Moscow, but probably they'll send her off to Siberia or something. Balwani in San Jose facing at least 20 years and maybe far more than that, based on 12 counts of various types of fraud against both investors and patients. Or this guy Chauvin in Minnesota, who just got sentenced to 21 years for killing
George Floyd.
George Floyd. Like, who? Yeah. If you had to pick your choices, would you lean towards 10 years in Moscow, 20 years in somewhere in California, or Minnesota with this guy who killed, and you compare it, a vape pen in Moscow gets you 10 years. You kill a black guy, you get 21 years. You try to do a startup company where you push the envelope to an extreme degree, and you're going to get at least 20 years and maybe even more than that, which is really going to be terrible.
He's not going to get 20 years. His sentence is going to be reduced. He's going to force to make restitution, and the judge is going to reduce the sentence.
Well, you sound very convinced about that.
That's my prediction.
Well, let me tell you, this is a state court judge that became a federal judge. I mean, we tried cases in front of him. He's a smart guy. He made his way from the state courts in San Jose, California Superior Court, Santa Clara Superior Court, over to the federal bench. And I think this is the highest profile case he's had to date. I mean, I think it's probably the biggest case he's had to date. It's gotten a lot of press. And in general, I think he's deferred the sentencing of Elizabeth Holmes to September. And, probably did that intentionally to figure out, let's see what's playing out with this Sunny Balwani case. And Sunny Balwani got a much more numerous conviction than Holmes, CEO and founder. And he put actual cash money in. He put actual millions of dollars of bailout money into the company. So you can't say that his skin wasn't in the game. His skin was totally in the game. So
I find this to be a very bizarre case, frankly. I don't, this kind of fraud, if a client came to me and said, I want to prove that fraud, I would say too hard. Because you have to prove that they knew the technology didn't work. And that's a hard thing to prove in a startup setting. And by the way, they had very, very sophisticated board members, Larry Ellison, Henry Kissinger, other people, very sharp people who know about these things. How could they all be taken in and rely reasonably on the statements? Doesn't make sense to me.
Well, it sort of says something about what does it mean to be a board member of a non-public company in California. And where it's a high-tech company that's moving fast, breaking a lot of glass, following the Uber model. You could argue that Theranos followed the Uber model of fake it until you make it. Basically, do what you need to do to make people believe and make it look like you're doing what needs to do, even if it's all fictional, because you'll catch up. The technology can eventually somehow get caught up. Something can happen that will make you get caught up. There's an argument, I'll just put it on this record, there's an argument that Steve Jobs did exactly the same thing in introducing the Macintosh. The operating system was not done. It was in the process of being done. He needed to some degree to fake it until he made it, or fake it until Apple made it. But the reality is it's just a computer. It's not a medical device. So you're not doing anything that puts human lives at stake, which I think is a big, huge difference between what Theranos did and what, say, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak did. Of course, Jobs is now deceased. I was just trying to look at kind of what's out there that sort of says where things are, where things have been in this case, and what likely will happen. You sound very convicted, very much with the conviction that he's not.
I haven't been convicted. I haven't been convicted.
I'm sorry. You are the strong conviction is what I should have said, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm not so strong, but I find it very, very strange. How can blood tests come through to doctors and not have them recognize there's a problem? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, somewhere in this, you would think there would be enough checks and balances, right?
Right.
But he has spent a lot of his judicial time on these two cases. Of course, they were joined together originally as co-defendants, and then she asserted that there was some, not spousal because they weren't married, but boyfriend abuse that resulted. Right. Judge Davila, his name is Judge Edward Davila, yeah. Davila. And, you know, right. Judge Davila must have spent over the last 3 or 4 years, I bet at least 1,000 hours of his time, probably more than that, on these two cases. And he had to divide them up so they weren't tried together because there would have been too much prejudice. And Balwani got to go second, which is a really big benefit for a defendant, because you get to see the way in which the case is put in by the prosecutors. So right. you get to watch. He could have actually sat there and watched. I understand he didn't do it, but he can get all the transcripts. He can get the first, probably he had one of his lawyers from the Orrick firm, a fairly large Bay Area firm, was defense right. counsel. Get to probably sit in to watch as the themes were developed against Elizabeth Holmes. I think her argument about the abuse went nowhere and didn't land a punch.
That's what I read.
And you have to imagine that if he's sentencing, how does he decide to sentence as between the CEO, founder, who didn't put any real money in, had a lot of sweat equity, and Balwani, who came in years later as a COO and put money in when the company was in desperate straits and lost money and basically followed the same thematic development of we're going to break a lot of glass here, but ultimately we'll change a business model. Because there is kind of an oligopoly that they're breaking, a little bit like an analogy to Uber, the taxi oligopoly. There is kind of an oligopoly of blood testing companies. They
probably. Well, I haven't read clearly whether the whole technology project is dead, permanently dead, or is it going to come back to life? It would be great to be able to get all these diagnostics from small amounts of blood. I know, for example, that glucose testing only takes a tiny drop of blood.
Right.
I don't know why all the other tests require more.
Yeah, I think the answer. I think the answer is that it's mostly dead, with the exception that there's a large body of issued patents, which are making their way into some other companies, which may produce some new value from them. And the question will be, will that new value be like a COVID test or some other fast-acting test? Because, I mean, imagine if they pivoted very rapidly in the face of COVID before all this stuff landed, and they said, look, we're just going to do very quick COVID testing. We're not even going to do all this diagnostic testing. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We got to deal with the low-hanging fruit. The low-hanging fruit is people don't want a big swab going up their nose. They'd rather give some blood. I mean, that's painful. I don't know if I've done that test. I've done it a few times. It's painful with that swab going all the way down your nose. And to me, taking a prick of blood.
No, I haven't done it.
Oh, you haven't done it, but if you travel at all, particularly overseas, they do this testing where they take a big Q-tip and they shove it down your nostril. It's
No,
painful.
I've seen it.
It's painful.
Yeah.
So,
And I don't trust it. I don't trust the tests. I don't trust the blood test. I had COVID, I'm sure, before anybody knew what it was, because all my symptoms tracked what I read about later.
right.
But my doctor said no COVID and no trace of COVID. I know it was wrong. I had it.
Oh, and
So-
did you have a vaccine and have it, or you hadn't gotten vaccinated yet?
The vaccine wasn't available at the time.
Okay.
Now I've been vaccinated and boosted.
Yep.
And I just read an article this morning that the second booster is a waste of time
Really?
for Omicron. Yeah,
I
the
mean, look,
second booster.
I think these vaccines are generally hit or miss. The flu vaccine annually is hit or miss. I think that if it covers 30%, it's viewed as good. If it covers 50%, it's viewed as great. And you have to imagine the mindset within a company like Theranos was, we're going to break this oligopoly the way Uber broke the taxi oligopoly, the way Apple broke the IBM mainframe, General Electric, a few other big companies, oligopoly of computational devices. And it takes pushing the envelope. And pushing the envelope, there's a gray line between when it's illegal and when it's just super zealous, and where
Yes,
that
and
line
when
is can change.
Right. And I first of all, Balwani only put on 2 witnesses and didn't testify in his own defense.
Yeah, I was surprised by that, because given that Elizabeth Holmes arguably succeeded, at least in reducing convicted of the patient fraud, I would have thought he would have thought, hey, she did it, I can do it. But he must have come away from it as she testified and killed herself, and maybe she would have gotten off. I mean, I can't imagine how many sleepless nights he had thinking about, do I testify, do I not testify? And of course, for those who are listening in, these are not totally blind tests, because there's a lot of mock juries that are used often, where mock juries would evaluate, do we believe him, do we disbelieve him? And they're strung to confidentiality, but basically they're from the demographics of the same jury. So they probably were doing that mock jury testing right up to the final decision, whether to have him testify or not. Ultimately decided that it would hurt more than it would help. It's a big decision.
He has no medical training. She does. And why wasn't he able to say, I relied on her? What went on there?
Relied on her, relied on other people in the organization.
Right.
You're making the argument that there's reasonable doubt that he could have any culpable state of mind, but there's a lot of emails, a lot of text messages, a lot of story generation that they knew that there were problems. And instead of sort of following protocol of shutting down any of the live events, they just trucked forward saying, we're going to get this fixed along the way. This is just getting the bugs out of the system. This is software that's solving the problem. It will get the bugs out. And once we have the bugs out, we'll have a usable device. They put on one witness that apparently was happy with her test results to sort of symbolize that, hey, it works some of the time, like the vaccines work some of the time, but Pfizer and others don't get crucified that it doesn't work, say, most of the time. They just accept the fact that it's sort of statistically gonna work, but not for everyone. And so they wanted to go with that view, and the jury, now I can't believe that the jury didn't know anything about the results in the Holmes case. It would be hard to imagine really getting a complete set of jurors that knew nothing about this story, zero, literally nothing. And, you have to imagine that maybe going second prejudiced him. Maybe had he gone first, he would have gotten off.
Maybe.
Right?
Maybe.
That's the question.
Maybe.
I mean, my guess is he spent at least 5 to 10 million on his defense, given the number of lawyers that were involved. That could be high, but there's probably jury consultants, there's expert witnesses.
I would like to know why Larry Ellison thought it was a good deal. Why Henry Kissinger introduced somebody else who thought it was a good deal. A lot of sophisticated board members. You know, it's not easy to fool those people.
Right.
So what happened?
They're following kind of the herd mentality. And the herd mentality.
I doubt it.
This is called kind of affiliation fraud. If you get someone like General McManus or somebody that's making it sound like the military is interested in a contract for the battlefield, and
Right.
it sounds like, you know, this is going to be a really great source of funding. So this can work out because even the 20% success ratio on the battlefield is viewed as efficacious. And so once you hear, hey, they've got the general on their board and they've got this and they've got that. And, you know, I think he was on 60 Minutes explaining that she had a lot of charisma. He had a lot of charisma too. And they just believed what was being dished and they didn't get backup scientific review. Whereas the early venture firm that put money in and eventually got their money back after filing a securities fraud case, they actually hired some scientists who said, this just can't work. There's not enough molecules of blood to analyze. And you can't you're breaking the laws of physics. You're trying to do something that's literally impossible. And they ultimately got either the insurance carrier or the company or someone to pay them back their entire investment. They're like the one party that wasn't hurt in this story. They filed their case early. They pursued it aggressively, and the company was like, just give them their money back. Let's move on. You know, we don't need to have people getting in our way. And so, you know, there's a great series of podcasts done by the Wall Street Journal reporter who really broke the story and wrote the book called Bad Blood.
In 2015.
His podcasts are just precious because he does a replay of all of his investigative work, which was due to the grandson of not Kissinger, who's the other big guy, the other governmental guy that was on the board, who recently died at the age of 100. He was on the board as well. And he was like, he was kind of viewed as...
has been convicted of fraud.
Yeah, he was kind of viewed, I'm looking for his name here. But his grandson, he's a guy that's at the Hoover. He was at the Hoover Institute, a very conservative guy at the Stanford Hoover Institute. But he gave them a lot of credibility. He was kind of wowed by her. And the grandson is the one who really leaked the information to the reporter from the Wall Street Journal. And he enabled Tyler Schultz. It's Secretary Schultz was the grandson is Tyler Schultz. And of course, you know, if you go on YouTube, you can find all these interviews of all these people. So it's a very rich set of data, right? Because Secretary Schultz was on the board and he put a lot of his own money into the deal. So that creates the herd mentality, right? I mean, if you think about it, that creates this sense of this must be something that's going to succeed. And people just get on board. I mean, that's just what happens. They want to believe that this is going to be successful. And there's kind of this irrational exuberance that plays out. I think that happens often with startup companies. It happened with Uber. I think Uber's valuation went through the roof. It happened with Apple. I mean, you can see it happened with Google, but of course, Google did perform. So, you know, there's quite a series of stories here. Tyler Schultz was really the individual that broke the story to the author of Bad Blood. What is his name? Carrier? I mean, and he did a bunch of Wall Street. His name is John Carreyrou, C-A-R-R. Carreyrou, yeah. And he broke the story. he was pretty firm in his view that this was all a major fraud. And in some ways, I guess maybe he should get some sort of Nobel Prize for his, or Pulitzer Prize for his reporting, right?
Any kind of startup, when they're soliciting investments, has to have a whole 3 pages full of "be careful, we're not sure, it may not work." I've never heard of a startup without that.
Yeah, you mean.
So what happened here?
Yeah, you mean like forward, sort of like the forward statement that these are forward-looking statements, right?
Yes.
We think this can get done. We're not sure.
Yes.
Basically, this is in testing.
Yes.
Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff like that. You know, if anyone watched 60 Minutes this past Sunday, they're talking about bringing back the plane that can go from New York to LA in 2 hours. Remember that plane, the one that traveled at above the speed of sound but generated a lot of sonic booms?
Long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. There was an Air France flight, the Concorde plane. It was a joint venture between British Air and I think Airbus or some French company.
Right.
And they had a version that went from New York to Paris like in 3 hours. The typical flight, I think, is more like 6, 7, 8 hours.
Right.
And it traveled at above the speed of sound. So there's a lot of sonic booms. So Lockheed is working on a plane that they think will be able to do that, but not have the sonic booms. But of course, they're like, we're not sure. You know, we're working on it. We have a theory. We can't guarantee it, but we want to speed up flight, particularly to Europe and Australia and all these places around the world. And maybe we could do it. But historically, they were not able to do it. They had to retire all those planes because people got upset by hearing the noise, the booms that were going on. They got like scared. And so even though a lot of the booms would happen over the ocean, going over the Atlantic Ocean, they basically shut down that entire operation. So most planes travel when they're full tilt, maybe 600 miles an hour. They don't travel at above the speed of sound. And that is like a big gating factor that they're trying to break. But of course, there are all these forward-looking statements that it's experimental, we don't know, but they are investing in it and they're taking shareholder money to do it because they think there could be a future where probably our grandkids will travel to Europe from New York in 2 hours.
But this is not an occasion for fraud prosecution. That's what I mean.
Right.
Yeah.
Your point is there should be enough, particularly for the investors. The patient might be a different kettle of fish because, you know.
But Balwani and Holmes were not talking to patients.
Yeah. Holmes was able to make that point and succeed. Balwani was not, because Balwani did the deal with the drugstore. And
Walmart.
These drugstores did set up these rooms that were designed to do fast blood testing. And so you go, if you go to a drugstore today, like a CVS or Long's or Walgreens, I think was the deal they did. They often have machines you could sit in to take your blood pressure, maybe take your temperature. But they had these rooms that were like these separate rooms that you would go into. And I saw one in Palo Alto. They built one in Palo Alto. Of course, the Walgreens has now been shut down there because of the pandemic reduced their foot traffic. But they had the room built, and it was a Theranos co-branded room where they thought, we're going to start pricking people and taking some blood and doing fast blood analysis. Now, if you've had blood taken, usually you go to a lab and they take like 2, 3, sometimes 4 vials of blood.
Correct.
And it takes a while. It could take like 20, 30 minutes to draw that blood. And it's not a simple process. And it does involve like a whole number of steps. And then of course the blood goes to a lab and, you'll get an electronic report, but it typically takes 72 hours. They're talking about the machine being like a local PC that you put
Correct.
the sample in, and boom, you get your results. I mean, that's a pretty amazing thing, right?
Oh, yeah, it's a wonderful idea. And by the way, someday it may happen. I don't know enough about the details of blood testing. I found this case surprising because I did not expect fraud claims. And I just also, as between Balwani and Holmes, I thought Balwani had no medical training, had a right to rely on Holmes. However, right. Balwani also, I read his letters, he said he took responsibility for everything. And when he was warned that there were mistakes, he shut the people up instead of listening to them.
Right.
But how many corporations have that happen?
They do it all the time. Yeah, yeah. They do it all the time. The reaction
They do it all the time.
We got to control the leaks. We got to control. I mean, right. Look, the picture that's painted is that Balwani and Holmes were joined at the hip for a number of years to get a facade created that they hoped the engineers would catch up. And it's like everything is moving so quickly. It would be the equivalent of McDonnell Douglas saying, oh, we have the plane, it's done. Yeah, you just, put your orders in, we're ready to go. And, they showed on the 60 Minutes, there actually is a private company taking orders for a similar plane. They haven't even figured out how they're going to put the right engine on it to make it work, but they're convinced that they can produce in a mass kind of way, in a large volume kind of way, a plane that's going to get people from New York to Paris in like 2 hours, beyond the speed of sound without all the sonic booms. And if that really is successful, they will be kind of a major producer of aircraft in competition with, Airbus and Boeing and McDonnell Douglas and others. So it's quite an interesting story of,
right.
And you could argue entrepreneurship pushes boundaries all the time. Travis Kalanick did it with Uber.
Right.
Steve Jobs did it with Apple. Bezos did it with Amazon. To some degree, Larry Ellison did it with Oracle, though Oracle was kind of a classic mainframe product initially and then made its way into mini computers and ultimately workstations. So, I mean, you could look at all these billionaires, one after the other, Elon Musk with Tesla, they're going to break the traditional mold. They're going to break they're going to break the paradigm.
Well, these guys are not being convicted because they broke paradigms. They're being convicted because they lied, supposedly. That's these are fraud claims.
Right. They didn't qualify. They didn't qualify their statements sufficiently.
It sounds like it.
We believe that our best judgment is, our opinion is, the research on this time at this time of the show. It was more hyped up. And I think the thing that really killed both of them is there were recorded interviews where none of that qualifying language existed. So it sounds more like a representation of fact than puffing or an opinion, which of course in law school, you have to figure out what's really a false representation of fact that one can reasonably rely on to their classic definition of fraud, made knowingly false with the intent to deceive. Those are all the elements versus a qualified opinion, puffery, exaggeration, hyperbole, no one could rely on. It's really just pie in the sky. And the jury in both cases leaned towards, it sounded more like a representation of fact rather than a statement of opinion or future expectation with all the qualifications behind it. But look at both of them now. They're middle-aged people. I guess he's in his 50s. She's in, I think, her 40s or maybe late 30s.
No, late 30s.
Late 30s.
He's 57.
He's
and
57.
I think she's 39.
Yeah, so it's like 20 years difference between them. She just had a newborn, went to court with it. I mean, really played up that drama. And some people think she's going to get more than 10 years. Some people think he's going to get more than 20 years. You probably think far less for each of them, right?
I do.
What do you think?
I do.
What do you think?
Well, I think they will be ordered to make restitution, and then the judge will reduce their sentences accordingly.
That's a big number. I mean,
Can they do it?
That can be a big number.
It is a big number, 157 million, I read.
Yeah, I mean,
But-
how do you exhaust all your assets? Now, remember, when it's a fraud judgment, at least in a civil case, it's not dischargeable in bankruptcy. There's a section in the bankruptcy code that says a fraud-based judgment continues for your entire life. There's
Correct.
no discharge. You can't get out of it via bankruptcy filing.
No, but if they can get the money together and repay, then they might get a reduced sentence. That's what I think.
Yeah, it's a little weird, though, if you think about the politics of that, which are if you're rich and you have money, you can buy yourself out of a jail term. There is something that's like strange about that restitution somehow reduces jail time. Like Chauvin couldn't pay, but maybe if he could pay the family.
No. His crime had nothing to do with money. But these people are being convicted because of stealing money.
Okay. So
it's very different.
So not for the patients, though. The patients were putting their life on the line, not just money, right? I mean, they were
Well, I don't know the facts. Did any patient die?
No.
Did any patient?
No.
So it's really unclear what's going on here. I find the whole thing a little weird.
Well,
I really do.
It's an example of the U.S. government through the Federal Department of Justice saying enough is enough. Silicon Valley has hyped too much innovation that doesn't really exist. This is like a Ponzi scheme. We need to step in and really set the boundaries so that CEOs, CFOs, COOs, all these C-suite executives will get some religion that they can't just do what they're doing. They have to reset everything. And the lawyers have to reset everything. The lawyers.
Yeah, I mean, why there wasn't warning language in all the communications, that's a lawyer mistake, frankly.
Well, your argument would be that maybe each of them have a malpractice claim against the corporate firms that they were being
Maybe.
By, right?
Maybe.
That's an interesting question, whether there's a tolling agreement, because there's a 1-year statute of limitations in California for a malpractice case, but there might be a tolling agreement.
Correct.
Let's see what plays out here before we get to the nitty gritty of a malpractice case. But if it's $150 million malpractice.
Well, there's a delayed discovery rule. They didn't discover the claim until they lost the trial. So they're within the year.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big number. I mean, that could break
It's certainly a big number.
That could break even a big law firm, because big law firms don't have that kind of insurance. If you say that
right.
Ultimately it's like $1 billion recovery and the law firm is somehow going to be on the hook. I mean, if that's really what plays out, that could break a big law firm, right?
We'll see how it goes. I don't think either Holmes or Balwani have that legal guts, the fire in the belly legally. It's a strange story. What do you think of Brittney Griner, by the way? We heard the news that
she admitted guilt as a way to move the case into, I really just want a prisoner exchange, right? I mean, that's what likely will happen if it happens, right? No?
If it happens, but I mean, for 2 weeks, we kept hearing how she was unjustly being held. And then she admits that she was carrying drugs.
Right.
Or at least a vial. I don't know what she was carrying.
She was carrying a vape. She was carrying a vape pen that's legal in about 20 of the 50 United States that has hashish oil designed to vape for relaxation, muscle relaxation. So it's actually legal in a lot of states. I've never used it, but I've seen people who have used it. I think it's very common on the streets in California and San Francisco. I think you could probably smell it if you were in San Francisco any given day of the week. I don't know if it's in Topanga Canyon.
Probably.
There's enough hippies there. But, she claimed that she had packed too quickly and didn't notice it. She had no intent to violate the law. the reality is when you're in a foreign country, the geographic territorial rules of that foreign country apply. So anything that's in your look, I remember going with a group of lawyers to Cuba, to Havana, under a special permit because we were investigating like what is going on to deal with these structures that are caving in downtown Havana, and people are getting killed. School kids are getting killed. And I had like all this equipment with all this video equipment, tape recording equipment, measurement equipment. And I think I had I don't know why I brought this with me, but I had a couple of Wi-Fi modems, like these little Wi-Fi, MiFi devices. And I got stopped on the way in at the border. Like, what are you doing? Are you setting up a radio station? Like, what is this equipment? They confiscated the whole bag, the entire bag of all my electronic equipment. They inventoried. I was there at the airport for 3 hours. And they said, if you want to get a special permit from the Department of State to allow you to have this equipment, but your visa doesn't allow you to travel with all this equipment. So I lost about $5,000 worth of electronic equipment. And I thought to myself, by lesson learned, you cannot travel. You must travel light and really clean because governmental rules are territorial. And Cuba is going to do, just like Russia, what they're going to do. And if they find something, they're going to be rigid about it. And I'm sure she regrets what played out. But, I tend to think Balwani wouldn't want to trade places with her. And I tend to think that Chauvin wouldn't necessarily want to trade places with Balwani. But maybe that's a stupid analogy that I'm using to start this. And
Chauvin might be assassinated in prison.
Yeah, I mean, it's a dangerous place to be in prison, where, of course, typically there's a larger Black population for reasons that have been investigated and prejudice exists. And, you got to wonder when he thinks about his life and when she thinks about her life and while Balwani thinks about his life and Holmes thinks about her life. I mean, the big difference, of course, is you've got some of these people that were extremely successful. Holmes was a billionaire, self-made billionaire. Maybe Balwani was as well to some degree. He had been rich through a different startup that he succeeded at. Griner was definitely a celebrity, still is, probably is a multimillionaire or was, I mean, depending on how much she's spending. And Chauvin was a street cop, right? Basically, probably middle class at best, right?
Right.
And, my understanding is that there was some drugs that maybe accelerated that death. And so it's like he made a judgment call there that was under the circumstances very poor, but maybe a healthy male adult suffering from drugs would have been able to not die. I mean, we don't know.
I read that.
I always thought that was a big factor for him that, this guy was on drugs. And I think his girlfriend even admitted it, right?
Yes, I read that. But Chauvin is the most obnoxious character I ever saw, frankly.
Well, clearly.
People were yelling at him.
Yeah, I mean, clearly it's striking. That video is striking.
Yeah.
And when you compare it to Griner, I mean, it's so malicious compared to, oops, I have a relaxant. I have some drugs, some recreational drugs with me. Oops.
Right.
I mean, that's just amazing. And then you compare Holmes and Balwani, and they're trying to build a company that is pushing the envelope with the right intention, which is we want this thing to work. We really do want it to work. We're being told if with enough time and enough resources, we can get it to work. It's just a software problem. And of course, everyone believes if it's a software problem, it's fixable. So we should watch this because I do think that there's a proportionality issue that no one's paying attention to on how sentences can be so disparate based on what actually happened. And we may see
But
some
we-
very disparate sentences between Holmes and Balwani, just based on the way the jury only convicted her of certain things, and they seem to have thrown the book at him. So we may see Judge Davila do some really interesting things here.
We'll have to wait and see, and then maybe we have to read some of the papers,
Absolutely.
some of the briefs.
Absolutely. I'll get them and circulate them. So thanks, Rafael, for spending the time this afternoon. I definitely need to make a trip to Panga Canyon and take you and your lovely wife out to
No, we'll take you out. Bring your wife and we'll take you out.
and at the Seventh Ray. We have to do that. We just have to figure out a time to do that, because it's just on my mind now, that whole event.
Okay. And bring your yarmulke.
Absolutely. No, and we'll say prayers and do the whole spiritual thing there,
The whole
because
thing.
and we'll get there early too to watch them as they do the prayers, because I think it's just a fabulous place. And if you haven't been there, not that we do advertising on this show, but if you haven't been there, it's worth the trip. And if you haven't been to the White Rabbit, of course, now it's very hard to get in and out of Moscow. But if you ever get to Moscow, you must go to the White Rabbit, because it is very much the same tradition. Thanks very much, Rafael. See you again.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.